Hello and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing my September book wrap-up. There were a couple of challenges I kind of sort of participated in that I'll link below. One was Shorty September by Pastory Time and Too Many Heathers, and that was nice because I did knock a few of the shorter books off my list. And then the other was the Magical Readathon, which I kind of sort of did. There are a lot of like side quest type things that you can do, and I just didn't have the energy for all of that. It can be, if you're so inclined, a very involved readathon. And then the other little thing that I started, and I'm only 3 books in, but there's no time frame attached to this really, is Wicked Readings horror bingo, because I'm trying to dip my toes into horror and try just a few different things here and there and see if I can cope with it. And then for the Read Around the World challenge, I did add books from Laos, Georgia, Timor-Leste, the Maldives, sort of. I'll get to that. Barbados, Estonia, and Brunei to my list of books that I've read, which was super fun. So now my map of the world is getting pretty colored in. I mean, I don't know. I'm hoping to get to about 75% of countries by the end of the year. And it will look like more than that because a lot of the countries that are remaining are little like Caribbean and Pacific island countries, and they're, you know, on my Excel map they don't even necessarily appear on the map, but I will read them all the same. And then I'm reading a few like disputed territories and stuff, and some of the islands that are owned by Britain or the US or whatever sort of nonsense, that probably should be their own countries, but somehow aren't. Anyway, there are a few books that I talked about quite a lot during a couple of previous videos. One, I tried to do a 24-hour readathon, which was 3/4 successful. So I'll just skim over the books that I talked about there, so that this isn't like an hour-long video, because I did get quite a lot of reading done this month, which was fun. Okay, so I got some more Virginia Woolf read. I didn't finish Night and Day because it was too ordinary. Like, it was fine. It was like if Virginia Woolf was going to do Jane Austen or George Eliot, it was fine. But it was too ordinary. And I don't read Virginia Woolf for ordinary. So I read Mrs. Dalloway, which I loved. It's not my favorite, but I did enjoy it. There's not a lot in the way of plot. Basically, there's almost nothing in the way of plot. This one, The Waves, has even less plot. I don't think I've ever read a book with less plot. There's like 0 things happen in this book. But it's about the experience of reading the words, more than... Oh yeah, so what did you write about this? I am writing to a rhythm and not to a plot. Pretty well. It's the rhythm of the waves of the ocean and the interiority of the various humans next to the ocean, and it sort of slides between those perspectives and then back to the ocean, and it is gorgeous. If you're looking for something poetic, it's stunningly beautiful, but if you're looking for something with a story, nothing happens. But I will 100% reread this book again sometime. Because, yeah, it was wonderful. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Night and Day, because it just was too... There was none of that stream of consciousness. There was no... I don't know. It just was too ordinary. 3 Lives by Gertrude Stein. And, oh, I'm trying to have my shelf of books not fall over. Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway, neither of whom are my favorite, but I wanted to give them another go just to see what all the fuss was about. But their style of writing is extremely not Virginia Woolf's style of writing. It's very plain, it's very straightforward. I'm not really sure it could get more plain unless you're reading like Sea Spot Run or something, especially with Gertrude Stein. I was not. It's just not the book for me. Like, I can see how it's for other people who like something simpler, but yeah, didn't really do anything for me. And then I read Greek to me, by Mary Norris, The Adventures of the Comma Queen. She is an editor, something or other. What is her job? Copy department of the New York Times is where she works. And but this was more about her trip to Greece, her interactions with the Greek language, trying to learn it, and its overlap with English, which, you know, was kind of interesting, but not really my cup of tea. Her Between You and Me, I liked better, but that was more like grammar, English grammar things, and I'm a geek, so there's that. Then I read Unsettled Remains, Canadian Literature and the Postcolonial Gothic, which basically looks at, I don't know, 8 or so Canadian books. Whether or not they're Gothic, the people in this book of essays argue, have Gothic elements. So looking at some of those elements of books that might not be Gothic themselves, but have Canadian Gothic spins or components. So that was really fun. And a couple of them I will be reading for Gothlit November, because why not? Then I read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and I'll have to read it again. It was really fun. It's beautiful. It's a bit weird. But it was really interesting to read because it influenced other people like Mary Shelley, who I'm interested in. It was fun to read. And then a couple more books that I'd already talked about. Whoops. The Satanic Verses, which was incredible. It's really bizarre, and you don't really know with any certainty if it's not all a hallucination or a dream or what on earth is happening. But it is that disorienting. I gather that it's supposed to mimic the disorientation of being an immigrant. And it is disorienting to read, but it's fascinating and really good. I did enjoy that one quite a lot. I'm really glad I read it to see what all the fuss was about. And then the last one I think I've talked about already is The Ballad of Black Tom. This is my second Victor LaValle book, and I think I'll read some more of him. It's horror adjacent. It's more like the threat of something horrifying. It is connected to some other classic horror book. There's some intertextuality there that I did not get because I haven't read, I can't remember the book, Cthulhu, the one with Cthulhu in it. It's somehow a response by a Black American man to that book. So that was lost on me a little bit. But it was a good story on its own. I enjoyed it. I'm not 100% convinced it's horror, but it was interesting. So I'm good with that. And then I read some cozy books. Okay. I read Louise Penney, The Madness of Crowds. And then the book after this, I listened to A World of Curiosities. And those are her 2 latest books. She's got a new one coming out, I think, sometime this winter. Either late 2024 or early 2025, called The Grey Wolf, I think it's called, and I will definitely read that. Yeah, she's my cozy, I need to feel better about the state of the world author. She's not a cozy mystery author in the way that other writers will like have a modern take on Miss Marple or something, but it's a legit mystery with sort of police procedural components, but the environment is always so cozy and the characters are so good and so interesting and actually often care about each other, which is lovely, like in a non-cynical sort of way, which is refreshing because a lot of the books I read are very serious and dramatic and sometimes quite violent. And these ones, even when there is violence in the form of murder, it's still ultimately about the human connections between the characters, which is just really beautiful. And so yeah, I enjoyed those. And then I read, Small Favors was another book I listened to by Erin A. Craig. I think I liked the idea of it more than the execution, but then again, I also think I didn't realize it was more like young adult, I think. I don't know. It came across that way to me. If I keep coughing, I'm sorry. I've got hot chocolate because I'm coming down with a cold, but this is the only day this week I have time to film, so here we are. Yeah, some sort of frog in my throat situation. Anyway, I liked the idea of that book because it did involve some sort of fairy tale components, but it just, there were too many things by the end that didn't make sense to me. The payoff was not what I'd hoped it would be at the end, basically. And then I read The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose, because she's got 2 books coming out really soon. She's got a 3rd one, and then a sort of Christmas novella coming out featuring the same character of the maid. Excuse me. And I love this character. She's very autistic coded, I think, which I also am autistic, so I view her as autistic, and I love it. She's a really fun character. I can relate to her a lot, except for the love of cleaning, which I do not have. I don't like mess, but I don't actually like the process of cleaning. Anyway, it's so fun and very cozy. And then what's next? Chapter and Curse was one of these more cozy mysteries, set in Oxford, Cambridge, one of those places. I don't know. Somebody had a bookshop. And there was a murder and a love story, and it was just a little too sappy for me, and fine. It was fine. It's not a book I'm ever going to read again. May not read any others by her either, but, you know, it's fine. The Cabin at the End of the World was also kind of fine for me. It wasn't my favorite. The premise was really interesting, but there were too many plot holes for me. Like, there were just too many things that even by the end, I was like, why would somebody behave in that? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. I didn't... The premise of the book, which I can't really talk about without spoilers, I don't think, didn't convince me. I wasn't convinced enough by it to justify certain decisions made by the characters. I don't know if that makes any sense to somebody who hasn't read it, but yeah, like, it was interesting, but at the same time, it wasn't quite enough for me. Then I read The Fallout by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir. I never know if I'm quite pronouncing her last name correctly because it's a mouthful, but she's Icelandic and is one of my favorite thriller writers. This is more straight up mystery than thriller. There are suspenseful moments for sure, but this is less atmospheric than some of her books and more just mystery, which is also fun. This is part of a series. She's got several series and then a few standalones. This is part of the What's It Called series. That's not very helpful. It doesn't say on here. Anyway, there are 2 characters. There's the detective, Huldar, and a child psychologist, Freya. And they work together, and this is probably the 5th or 6th book, and I don't know why it doesn't have that in the front, but it doesn't. Oh yeah, there it is. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 6th book in this series. She's got another series, the Thora Gudmundsdóttir series, which is fantastic. And her standalones are also really, probably some of her best books, I think, in terms of atmosphere in particular, and thrilleriness. They're a lot of fun. Really enjoy them. If I was going to reread any, it would probably be those standalones. And then, so Jeff Vandermeer is coming to a literary festival in Calgary. So I'm going to go see him. He's doing an event with Stephen Graham Jones. And I had read Annihilation, I don't know how many years ago, a good few. Whenever the movie came out, I'd read it before that. And then just hadn't gotten around to the next 2. So now I've read, I listened to Authority and Acceptance, because he's got a new one called Absolution coming out, which is sort of a surprise 4th novel, because it was the Southern Reach trilogy, and now it's just a series with an extra book. But I enjoyed Authority and Acceptance. I think with Acceptance, I really liked it, but I think I would have gotten more out of it if I'd read it in closer proximity to Annihilation, because there were some points of view that were the characters in Authority, which I'd just read, which were easier sections to follow. the relationships, the sections by characters from this book, Annihilation, were a bit harder to follow because I was trying to remember who these people even were and what their connections were to each other. And there's a lot of weird in these books, just generally. So if you also are missing information from the other books, it's just going to be weirder and less comprehensible. But I liked it. Also, I'm just not opposed to plants taking over the world. So, you know, if they're up for that, they could hardly do worse than humans at this point. Then I read Gothic Literature by Sue Chaplin, because I'm a geek about books, and I tabbed it all up and everything. This is actually an English lit textbook by a professor at Leeds Metropolitan University. I know Leeds is in the UK somewhere, but I couldn't find it on a map, so, you know, she's British. And it explores the genre from its origins through Romantic and Victorian Gothic to modernist and postmodernist reimaginings, analyzing key debates such as the female Gothic and the Gothic narrator. So yeah, she goes through some classic works. There's a Stephen King novel that comes up in here. There's a section on Gothic bodies, on the female Gothic, on narrative instability and the Gothic narrator. So the first 2/3 maybe are the history and development of Gothic, as she doesn't actually call it a genre, which I tend to agree with. I can't remember how she described it, but I tend to view it as an adjective that can be applied to many genres. And there's, if I can find it, I'll include it in the description below, of how she described it, but she didn't really describe it as its own genre separate from other genres. There's a lot of overlap between other genres, especially horror and romance, and more modern thrillers, like psychological thrillers and things like that. So yeah, it's really interesting. And then I reread Beloved, which is one of my all-time favorite books. It's magnificent. It's transcendent. It is really brutal and disturbing, but it's also gorgeous. She was an amazing writer. I love Toni Morrison. I've got to reread more of her books more often. Yeah, I just feel like her writing can heal something in the human experience of the world somehow. She's magical. And this is considered a Gothic book, which I can see. It's also dealing with the fallout of slavery, the consequences of slavery on one particular woman, and a few other people in the book, obviously, but the one woman, Setha in particular, what it does to her, and how it informs her decisions and what she has to live with afterwards is so brutal. But it's, I think, really, really important to get inside the heads of people who've had those experiences. And I think nobody has ever done it that better than Toni Morrison. Then I listened to The Night of the Living Res. This is called a book of stories, but I actually felt it was closer to a novel. It's a series of connected stories that's basically a novel. Set in Maine, the Penobscot First Nation. It's really interesting. The characters are a bit, for a lot of the book, they're a bit frustrating, but you know, at the same time, you know that something traumatic must have happened to them to inform their decision-making, because it's very poor decision-making. But at the same time, the way they behave with each other can't possibly come out of nowhere. And so the end of the book did take me by surprise, so that was fun. So I won't say anything more than that, but yeah, it was really good. Then, oh yeah, I listened to The Salt Grows Heavy. I think I have to listen to that again. It's really short. It's only like 3.5 hours or something. But I'm not entirely sure I followed what was happening. It's a really weird horror mermaid book. It was fun, and violent, and weird. And I'm not entirely sure I got everything the first time, so I think I have to listen to it again sometime. The author there is also from Malaysia. And then I listened to Untamed Shore by Silvia Moreno Garcia, who I think is Mexican. And I read Mexican Gothic and loved it, but that's the only book of hers that I read. And Untamed Shore is more noir than Gothic. Well, the last half is more. The first half of the book is pretty just standard contemporary novel. It's good. It's a good story, but there's nothing particularly noir-ish that I could discern about the first half of the book. The last half of the book, though, definitely. And it gets more mysterious and interesting at that point. But yeah, I really, really liked the main character. She was really fun to watch, and to watch her development. Yeah, that was cool. A couple of horror sort of related books that I've started but haven't finished are Powers of Horror, because this was mentioned in at least two books about the Gothic that I've read now. And Julia Kristeva is a professor of linguistics at the University of Paris. And it's very much a philosophy book. It's a philosophy of horror. An essay on objection is the subtitle. And it's fascinating, but it's going to take me a while to read because the language is really academic, but it didn't feel egregious, it felt precise. So yeah, I'm working my way through that, but it's gonna take a while. And then I hope to finish this in October. The horror stories, Classic Tales from Hoffman to Hodgson. I'm that far into it. And they're really fun so far. They're very different. The older original horror stories, ghost stories, very different from modern ones, but a lot of fun to read. And then some other non-fiction that I read. I listened to Taking Up the Runes by Diana L. Paxton because I'm studying the runes, and that was really good. Part of it's an overview of the meanings of the runes, and then part of it is how you can apply the use of the runes in your life, in your practice today. So that was cool. And then I read, trying to have my books not fall over again, The Peace by Romeo Dallaire. This is a really good book. He was the UN commander in Rwanda during the genocide. He's a Canadian general and former senator. And he'd written a book about Rwanda. He'd written a book about PTSD post-Rwanda, and then one other book about child soldiers. And he's done a lot of work towards peace internationally with the UN and other organizations. And he has a lot of criticisms. Not just of the UN, but of the member states that make up the UN, that give the UN any power that it does or doesn't have. And so he doesn't hold back on his criticisms, but he also comes up with ideas about rethinking our approach to peace internationally, because clearly it's not working. Really spectacularly not working. So yeah, I really like that book. It was a good one. This throat issue is driving me nuts. Also, my mug says Village Witch, if you can see that. It's cute. I like him. Then I listened to The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. It was interesting. It was all right. I'm not sure quite what I expected, but it wasn't quite what I expected. He spends a lot of time on UFOs, like really a lot of time on UFOs, on conspiracy theories like that. And I just, that didn't interest me at all. Some of his stuff later on in the book, if you can get through all the stuff about UFOs, this is, one of the reviewers said, a stirring defense of informed rationality, rich in surprising information and beautiful writing. And for the last half of the book, I think that's probably true. I liked it. He doesn't have a super high opinion of religion, but I knew that going in, so that's fine. He's not required to. He's, being a scientist. But yeah, I really got bogged down in the UFO section and just Not interesting to me. And then, oh, this one I didn't finish. I gave up. Not really very far into it. This is Veneficium by Daniel A. Schulke, and the subtitle is Magic, Witchcraft, and the Poison Path, which sounds like something I would like. And the content of the book is something I would like. The writing of the book is not something I like. It is so pretentious. So pretentious. Not in a... Julia Kristeva's writing is difficult in a way that is justifiable in academia, because sometimes you need precision in language. So you use jargon or you use complicated words to be accurate, to be precise. He uses big words to make himself sound smarter, is very much the impression I got. I mean, maybe it's not a fair impression, but that's the impression I got. It was not necessary. I do not like his writing style at all. I just can't do it. I'm not going to spend my time reading that. One book that I did really like, though, is Our Green Hearts, The Soul and Science of Forest by Diana Beresford Kruger. And this does have some sciencey bits that might be difficult. I'm going to have to reread it because I didn't get everything. Like, I certainly missed a lot. Because she's a scientist in the fields of medical biochemistry, botany, and medicine. So it's not academic writing, but it's not quite super simple writing either. But the way she talks about the forest is so intriguing and so beautiful, and I love it. And she does also combine science with some of her background learning about Druidry in Ireland. She is an Irish author. I think she works in Canada now, though, but she has worked in Ireland, and she's written a few other books that I will have to read, because she's just, yeah, I loved this one. It does make you want to go out and just sit in a forest for a while, which, I mean, it doesn't take a lot to make me want to do that, to be fair, but this book really does. It's beautiful. She's also going to be at the literary festival that I'm going to next month, October. So that'll be fun. Very much looking forward to that. And then the other nonfiction book I read, or I am reading, in the same vein as Earth Democracy by Vandana Shiva. She's an author I've got to read more of, because she's written a lot of books and I have not read most of them. The subtitle on this one is Justice, Sustainability, and Peace. Pardon me. I'm only fifth of the way through it. And the beginning it's both infuriating, but also there's bits of hope in there, because she goes over the ways in which capitalism is a disaster for a lot of people around the world. She's Indian, like from India, Indian. And so that's her perspective and where most of her experience is. So she talks a lot about the absolute devastation that organizations like Monsanto and Coca-Cola have brought into India. Like, it's absolutely brutal and completely inhumane. But then she also talks about more local economic systems that could be the thing that helps us into the future. And I haven't gotten a lot into those sections yet, but that's Earth Democracy, basically, is what she's talking about. Living democracies, living cultures, and Earth Democracy in action are the next sections. And the premise is, well, these are the 5 principles. All species, peoples, and cultures have intrinsic worth. The Earth community is a democracy of all life, not just humans. Diversity in nature and culture must be defended. All beings have a natural right to sustenance. So one of the premises is that everybody has the right to food, water, clothing, shelter, the basics, which you wouldn't think would be hugely controversial, but here we are. And then the next premises are Earth Democracy is based on living economies and economic democracy, meaning systems that protect people's livelihoods and provide basic needs to all, where there are no disposable people or dispensable species or cultures. 6, living economies are built on local economies. And 7, Earth Democracy is a living democracy. Living democracy is based on the democracy of all life and the democracy of everyday life. In living democracies, people can influence the decisions over the food we eat, the water we drink, the healthcare and education we have. Living democracy grows like a tree from the bottom up and is based on local communities organized on principles of inclusion, diversity, and ecological and social responsibility. So I'm into that, basically. I've not finished it yet, but I'm really enjoying it so far. I've read her book Stolen Harvest as well, which is little, but also infuriating, because as I recall it, it's mostly about Monsanto and Cargill and seed ownership, which is maddening. Anyway, and then I just have a few more audiobooks to run through. So I listened to a few audiobooks and read a couple ebooks for this Read Around the World challenge. For goodness sake. One was How to Pronounce Knife by, I'm going to attempt this name, Suvankam Thammovongsa. She's as close to an author from Laos as I can get, because I think she was born in a refugee camp in Vietnam, and her parents then moved with her to Canada. There was another book from Laos that I was going to get, but then it went off. It was a used book that was on Amazon and then went off Amazon and then was back for like $2,000 or something bonkers, which who pays $2,000 for a book? Anyway, it was a collection of short stories. There was nothing wrong with the book. It's not my style of book. It's just the subject matter of, like, it was people in nail salons and things, and just stories that I wasn't personally interested in, but it was well written. Like, it was a good book of short stories. The subject matter was just not my cup of tea. And then I read Hard by a Great Forest by Leo Vardiashvili from Georgia. And that was really interesting. It's very folktale adjacent because it's linked to the story of Hansel and Gretel. And, following the breadcrumbs through the forest to try and find your way out. And so basically two sons, well, one in particular, go back to Georgia after living in, I think, the UK, if I recall, to find their father, who's also gone back. Their mother had stayed. The father and the sons had left during some sort of war that I really don't know anything about, when it was too dangerous for the kids to stay there. And their mother has now passed away. Their father disappeared, so one of the sons went back to look for him. He disappeared, so now the other son is going back to look for them. And in the process of searching, has to deal with a lot of emotional, I guess, upheaval and stuff that when you're a kid, you don't have the ability to process. You know what's happening during a war and how people are treated and the horrible things that people do to each other. You can't. How can you? Adults can barely process that stuff. Kids certainly can't. So he's going back and meeting people and working his way through some of these difficult things, trying to find his family. Then I read an ebook from Timor-Leste, and this was another one of those countries where it was basically impossible to find a book in English, like a physical book in English that wasn't like $400 or something. And I don't usually read books by politicians, but this one won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 or thereabouts. And it's Words of Hope in Dangerous Times, Collected Speeches and Interviews by Jose Ramos Horta, who is the president of Timor-Leste. I don't know if he still is. He might be, for all I know. I don't know. Before this Read Around the World challenge, I wouldn't have been able to find Timor-Leste on a map. So my cultural knowledge is tiny, basically non-existent. But it was really interesting because I did learn something about the relationship of Timor-Leste to Indonesia, which has been fraught and violent, and also to previous colonial powers like Portugal, and to other neighboring countries like Japan and South Korea. And I mean, his speeches were such that if he was a politician in Canada, he's the sort of politician I would vote for. So it's all very based on human rights and equality and treating people respectfully despite our differences, you know, because there are a lot of religious differences. It's a very Catholic country, and Indonesia, which had invaded it, is a very Muslim country. So there was a lot of violence there for a while. And so yeah, his speeches were very, like, they were very diplomatic, because you have to be if you're a leader of a country, I suppose. But also really hopeful, but I couldn't figure out if they were unjustifiably hopeful given the violence of the world, or if it was really the only option as a survival mechanism in a dangerous world. So, you know, it was interesting. And then I also couldn't find an actual book from the Maldives, so if you know of any, let me know. Couldn't find one in English or French that I can get in Canada. Nothing. So what I did in the meantime is I went to the Maldives tourist website, and they've got some folktales up there. And so I read a couple of those, and they were fun. And you know, you do learn a little bit about a country from their folktales, if only about the environment that they're set in, and some of what's important to them. But yeah, like, if this is one of those cases where if I find a book from the Maldives sometime, I'll read it and sort of replace these folktales in my list of books for each country. But in the meantime, it's gonna have to do, because I really couldn't find anything. For Barbados, I read How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Sherry Jones. It was really good. It's a really well-written book. There's a lot of domestic violence in it. The main character, well, there was one sort of side main character. I don't really know what she was doing there. I either wanted her to be more developed or less present. But the main character, she was really interesting. I liked her, and her trying to deal with her place as a woman in the world in Barbados. It was really difficult for her to sort of recognize what she needed to do with her own life and her own choices, and trying to recognize, you know, her own self-worth, basically. I guess you could say. But yeah, it was quite good. The Man Who Spoke Snakish by Andreas Kivarak is a book from Estonia, and I loved this one. I actually loved both of the next two. The Man Who Spoke Snakish, the premise is it's set in Estonia in the very, very early days of Christianity. So it's almost a pre-Christian society where people still live in the forest and can still talk to the animals in a language called Snakish. Mostly they talk to the snakes, but they can talk to all sorts of animals using this language. And it's fantastic. I loved this book. The main character is fantastic. The side characters are also, like supporting characters, are also really fun. It's really interesting. And then it goes through the process of Christianization and how people move out of the forest into these villages. They adopt this new religion, they forget Snakish, and the fallout from that. So yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed that one a lot. And then this one I could only find as an ebook, because I could not find any physical books from Brunei, like at all in Canada. None. But Katharina Moad Duad, not sure how you pronounce that name properly, has written a couple of books. They're both available as ebooks on Amazon, and The Witch Doctor's Daughter is really good. So I will definitely read The Fisherman King at some point. That's her other one. But The Witch Doctor's Daughter is basically a girl, young woman, like in her late teens to early 20s, trying to figure out her life and what she wants to do with her life. She's from a small town in Brunei, sort of in the middle of nowhere. So her options are somewhat limited, which, you know, as somebody from the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, I can relate to. You finish high school, you're like, what even are my options? I have no idea what's out in the world. And so her experience in Brunei, this character's experience, was very similar. Her mom was a woman who like, the title is witch doctor. In the book, she's not outright called a witch doctor, but she gets rid of jinn if they're like possessing or harassing people. And her dad helps sort of run that as a business. He's the businessman performer, sort of weird role he's created for himself around his wife's ability to remove jinn. And her daughter isn't really interested in the spiritual side of things, but she is interested in the herbalism side of things. So she spends a lot of time in the book learning about traditional herbal remedies in Brunei, which I find fascinating. It was so fun. And yeah, I won't give away much more than that, because there is some uncertainty as to her future and what her options are, and is she going to be able to create a path for herself. There are a couple of men who may or may not be involved in her path, and, you know, does she want them in her life? Is her relationships, are her relationships with them going to be something that aligns with what she imagines for her future, that sort of thing. So it's not really a coming of age, but it's got some of those components. But yeah, it's a really well-written book. I really enjoyed it, and I will definitely read her other book, even though it's an ebook, and I don't like reading ebooks. I think that's all I've got for September. That was a lot. I read a lot in September. I'm very happy about it. A lot of them were audiobooks, which sometimes I can read at work at like 2 times speed, so that's why. But yeah, that was September. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.